Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Brilliant Stars, make sure you go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be breaking down the top 10 decks for the European International Championships, the first IC post-COVID. I'm really excited. I'm flying out next week. Let's jump into what I think are the top 10 decks. We've got deck lists here as well as matchup breakdowns and the core strategy of the list. So first of all, let's look at the results of online events as well as looking at the results of the 4 regionals that we've had in this format. On the left-hand side, you can see these are top 8 placements for the last month or so of tournaments that we've had, a little over a month here. And you can see that Genesect Mew is still one of the most popular archetypes out there in terms of placing in that top 8, as is Inteleon. And there's a big drop towards some other decks down here vying within that sort of top 10 decks. And you can see the points here. This is just the limitless points based on, you know, how many top 32s, top 64s, and I think top 8 placements. It's all scaled up basically in points, but this does still give a pretty good reflection of some of the top performing decks in general. Pause now if you'd like. This is going to be an indicator for me for the top 10, but some of my own opinion will be actually coming into play with the placements as well. So let's start off with our number 10. And as you can see, there is a community rating here as well. I did a poll on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and I'm also going to be showing off their regional placements of top 8 and better in the top right as well. But we'll start off with Arceus Whimsicott. This sort of came out of the blue in Sao Paulo, so it's the new deck on the block. And I do think it has an interesting placement in the format, actually. The core strategy is looking to remove energy in play and then make it hard for your opponent to actually attack you in general, because the Trick Wind attack denies the opponent from attaching special energy cards from their hand. This can be really annoying, especially for Mew, which is usually playing 1 or 0 special energy. So even though they can a lesser Sparkle, if you've completely wiped the board of energy, they're not able to attack you. They have to like Sparkle pass, and that's not going to be a good turn for them. You can continue to churn away with that Trick Wind attack and continue to throw disruptive cards in their face to deny them attacking you altogether. And simply because you play these fans, these crushing hammers, you can also deny attacks in Arceus mirror match situations, because you simply buy free turns with this Trick Wind denying the attachment of double turbo energy. And it's a huge issue for Arceus decks, especially those that don't play Melanie. The ones that only play Raihan can really suffer at the hands of these early game disruption cards. So yeah, the Trick Wind attack is proving to be awkward. Its typing is actually also pretty interesting. Being a psychic type that's actually weak to metal instead of darkness makes it pretty tanky and can still hit for weakness on Rapid Strike Urshifu. You can see that that's one of the strongest matchups. You deny them attaching Rapid Strike energy whilst hitting them for weakness as well. You don't hit the knockout without the choice belt, but that's why it's going to be in the list here. Slightly adapted from the top 8 list, but I have had a few games with it, and I do feel like this is a solid archetype for certain. I am playing that Choice Belt plus Zigzagoon combo. I think it's good when you're just being an early game Arceus deck. Makes the Trinity Nova much more dangerous. And like I said, Choice Belt with Trick Wind actually knocks out. And Urshifu, even with the reduction of your own double turbo, you go up to 190, back down to 170, times 2, 340. So you're still getting that one hit KO on Urshifu. Pretty big deal because they do still play basic fighting at times. So yeah, the core of the deck is try and use Arceus Starbirth as well as the barrel to help you draw cards throughout the game. And oftentimes you lead out early with Arceus, but there's nothing to say that you can't try and Trick Wind throughout the entire game. We're playing 2 Raihans in the list, as well as those double turbos that do work well with the Whimsicott. So yeah, trying to establish that lock, definitely going to be important to use things like Cry of Destruction on Yveltal, specifically against Mew. Get rid of 3 fusion energy all in one go, can sometimes just out-resource them on their own. So a pretty awkward deck to play against for a number of archetypes, actually. And for other options, like I said, just a few tweaks from the top 8 list. Ordinary Rod was a card that they're playing, and we are playing some thin lines of our attackers. And even to an extent, it's helpful to get back the low count of energy that we play, basic energies at least, especially if you are leaning into that Arceus side that little bit more than Trick Wind. it can be nice to reload a couple basic energy. And because Path isn't actually like integral to the deck, it's something that you do, but also you have alternate win cons against Mew. The Path is actually like more annoying for mirror match situations, but I could easily see there being something like Collapse Stadium or Avery coming into the list, because I think some of your harder matchups actually are going to be Rapid Strike Malamar and Suicune Ludi, these decks that have enough basic energy to not get completely walled out by Trick Wind and Crushing Hammer, and can reach one-hit KOs fairly easily on these two prizes. So possibly the Collapsed or the Avery could be coming into this deck to give yourself a better time into some of your sketchier matchups. In at number 9 then, we have Duraludon Arceus. This was one of the most popular Arceus builds straight out the gate, and it sort of fell out of popularity a little bit after we saw Echoing Horn coming into Mew players' deck lists. But I do think that Arceus Duraludon has got down to this point where it's not a popular enough deck that people really need to worry about teching for it, but it still has a lot of strengths on its side. It's a very simple game plan where you're trying to give your opponent as much hit points to deal with as possible by really not putting many Pokemon down onto your bench, just the things you're trying to attack with each turn. You're going to try and use that Starbirth, trying to get that Nova powering up Duraludon, so hopefully 2 Duraludons, and you have that annoying Skyscraper ability built in. Pulverization gets through all effects, so no matter what, you're hitting that 220, which is always a good baseline for at least 2 prize Pokemon, and is easily two-shotting other Pokemon. You have inbuilt healing with Crystal Cave and Hyper Potion. And this is just really annoying. It's just a very chunky guy, forces most decks to draw well against you. Anytime you get a free turn with this deck is just absolutely disgusting because you're churning through. And its matchup spread is actually still really nice, I think. Not going below like 30% against anything but just Whimsicott right now is very tempting. So I think this is not a poorly placed deck in the format. Not necessarily the most interesting to play. You have a couple key decisions, mostly in your early turns when you're working with not a lot. But once you get to turns 2 and 3, the deck sort of pilots itself, where all you're needing to do is like attach energies, thin your deck, and attack, basically, and look towards hitting things like Hyper Potion and whatnot. Those are the only things that you necessarily need to manage. So the deck list is very simple, and if you're someone that's not super confident in your own ability to play the game just yet, if you're fairly new to the TCG, just returning, for example, or if you hadn't had a lot of time to process the metagame, this is actually a really good pick up and play deck, I think. Not the cheapest, of course, but I think in terms of gameplay, there are only a few things that you really need to nail with the deck in terms of things to bear in mind. So, yeah, pretty simple list here. Yeah, I feel like it's got a simplistic playstyle with a pretty strong strategy at the core. For other options, I've tried Mustard. I actually initially never liked the Mustard, and I still feel like it's one of these cards that comes up once in a blue moon, so I'm just not playing it right now. Once again, bench disruption is not a bad thing for this deck, especially because things like Rapid Mally and Suicune, well, I think Suicune's still a pretty reasonable matchup, but I think the Rapid Mally can be a tricky one without the help of these Stadium or Supporter cards, so it could be an include for you. And Training Court, because I just said Whimsicott is one of your hardest matchups, apparently. I think that's pretty much entirely down to them being able to hammer away your fighting energy. So having Training Court as like one of your 4 stadiums could be a bit of a safety net there. And in general, it's not a bad card just to Training Court, then Mana yourself so you can attack with Arceus and like put those energies straight back into play all in one turn. I think that's like a minor play that's also pretty nice for the deck. In at number 8, we actually have Suicune Ludicolo. This had a really impressive second place finish with Finn Lynch, showing off a pretty different build of Suicune Ludi, and really showing off the combo potential this archetype has, trying to piece together Shady Dealings alongside that Fleet-Footed to make Rare Candy combos happen with that Ludicolo, get into huge damage, oftentimes being able to one-hit KO easily Arceus and sometimes even Mew as well. So very dangerous deck. You play the 2 and 1 prize game pretty well. You can weave in an attack with Inteleon pretty easily, just because of the Raihan that you're playing in the deck, and you have constant acceleration with that Melanie, so whenever a Suicune comes into play, you can attack with it all in that one turn, so you don't necessarily have to put them all down proactively. You can try and force that one prize game, which is always a nice thing to go for, and force more turns out of the opponents, and that's really what Suicune Ludi is trying to capitalize on. I've recently done a video of this list as well, so you can go ahead and see me playing it just the other day, and I talk about the includes in depth, but right now I am playing Manaphy Carrier to try and help out against some of the spreading archetypes like Jolteon and Urshifu. That's a preference call based on the metagame you're expecting. Those are the spaces I've made right now. But if you do want to go back to Finn's list, of course, the one that was most successful, it was playing 4 copies of Cross Switcher, and it played Echoing Horn, Cross Switcher just being a great way to allow you to Melanie for turn and still have Gust available, Echoing Horn being a +20 in the worst case scenario, but also can be forcing back 2 prize Pokemon into play, so that you can take easier prizes with those cross switches in combination with one another, so always a decent thing to have here. An Escape Rope again, kind of that pseudo cross switcher thing where you just want to push something out of the way, maybe turn 2 when you haven't got a Ludicolo play set up for yourself, you can just try and push, take like a 1 prize KO that can still be valuable for you. In certain instances. So yeah, the rope not a bad one of include either in the deck. In number 7, we have Gengar VMAX. This got a couple top 8s early on in the regionals, but didn't really carry on through to Liverpool or Sao Paulo. But it, again, has a pretty simple strategy. Your energy acceleration comes from your Stage 1 Houndoom, and you power up Gengar, which is hitting for a really important weakness right now in the format. But in general, Gmax Swallow Up already can hit silly numbers. So this is the big one-hit KO merchant, really, of the format. You can easily use things like Urn of Vitality to recover those single strike energies and swallow up Arceus all in one go. So a pretty dangerous deck. It does have some fragile elements to it. As you can see, Rapid Strike Urshifu, one of its hardest challenges, and Rapid Strike Malamar, also a tricky one. But in general, it's got a pretty close game plan against most archetypes. And this is the list I'm rocking with. I do really like the Tool Jammer include. It denies the opponent from Big Charm, so it acts as a choice belt essentially against Arceus, which is the most important thing. And Tool Jammer also gives you a little bit of help against Jolteon, which is one of those decks that's sort of creeping back into the format, so do have to be a little bit careful about those, and at least denying Elemental Badge can give you some hope here, which is actually pretty solid for you, so slightly better than the choice belt, I would say. But has that simple game plan of trying to get that Houndoom out. You are playing VIP passes, so sometimes you can get that Bidoof down early to give you that extra little bit of push potential throughout the game. So I think this is, not the most consistent deck, but does have a pretty easy rinse and repeats once you get into the game of trying to roll those big one-hit KOs. For other options, Lumineon could be nice just for extra access to your specific supporters. Manaphy could be additional protection. As you saw, Rapid Strike Urshifu, already a really hard matchup. But you could try and help out the Jolteon and the Urshi in this way. And Incense just giving you extra outs to your stage 1s, because that's going to be important to flood the board full of them if you can find the space. In number 6, then, we actually do have this Jolteon deck. It has got a couple sort of surprising regional top 8s. Manaphy is creeping into some decks, but certainly not a super popular include, and Jolteon is really capitalizing on that by being one of the most destructive decks, denying those engines from the opponent, getting rid of Sobbles, getting rid of Bibarrels or Bidoofs, and really denying the opponent any draw, especially because you are also trying to throw the Judge Path combo in the mix, specifically against the likes of Arceus and Mew, of course. So that's where you're going to try and buy some turns of breathing room to just capitalize on their board with the Thunder Rumble. Some of his hardest matchups, the likes of Rapid Strike Urshi, looking pretty rough. Outside of that, you've actually got a pretty good matchup spread. And the deck hasn't changed a huge amount. I think the double Cheryl has really been the thing that's caught on in the Brilliant Stars format. That's so that you can try and do a healing game plan against Arceus. Even though they play Cherens, you have your Cheryls, and you can both hit into one another slowly. Of course, you're hitting multiple targets while they're only hitting you in the face. So yeah, pretty handy card to have here. Outside of that, a pretty straightforward 60. I am playing Scrapper to get rid of Jammers, interestingly enough, and can get rid of like health buff tools. And I'm playing that Fan of Waves for extra disruption against Mew and Arceus as well. For other tech options, you could go the full Sydney route to try and secure that path. I think it's a little bit harder to weave in than in Arceus builds because you can't V-Star power for it. So I think it's one of those that is not in the list, but I could see coming into the deck. Ultra Ball to give you extra outs to early game Jolteon. Sometimes, especially when you go second, you want to have double Jolteon developed. If not, you're going to have a bad time sometimes, unless your disruptive cards take control. And again, Rope is a reasonable option just to push something that you've hit previously in the face to the bench so you can snipe it and make sure you're taking a prize elsewhere as well. Can be a pretty handy thing for you. On to number 5 then, we have Urshifu Inteleon. Now this got a surprise regional win in the hands of Robin Schultz with a brand new take on the deck. Of course, we know that Urshifu in a vacuum is a very strong, efficient card, but alongside Octillery and Inteleon and a dark package, it's managed to once again become relevant. And its matchup spread is actually really wacky. I do think some of the low percentages could easily be higher with correct play. And it's also hard to sort of just pick up and play Robin's deck. I think it's a pretty tricky one to do so. So I do think you almost write off the matchup spread that you can see at the bottom here, because it's really down to the player themselves and how they navigate these matchups to get the most out of this archetype, because it's options, options, options. This deck can do all sorts of things. Its prize race can get very wacky at times because you have Yoga Loop on your side. You can take bench KOs when needed with that rapid flow as well. So there's a lot to piece together here, but certainly is a nice challenge to play and has a lot of power behind it as well. This is pretty much the same as Robin 60. I think the only thing I changed was I cut Tower of Waters to Training Court, and I went up to a second Bird Keeper over Snorlax. That was the only thing I did. I think a lot of people will be cutting that Snorlax, seeing as though you go for Keep Calling very often anyway with the deck. And I think the Bird Keeper is a nice supporter regardless, and can obviously pitch in for the help of us removing that tower, because I do like Training Court as almost like a third E-Search in the deck. It's actually a super important card, especially when you are leaning into this dark package against the likes of Mew. This can be a really big include. But yeah, very wacky engine. The supporter line is still crazy to look at. Maintaining your prizes and keeping your eye out for when to weave in the Peonia is always a tricky thing as well. So certainly not an easy deck to pilot, but has a lot, like one of these decks that can reap the rewards of playing perfectly as well. Some of the tech options, I have tried out Mini Eldegoss package over the Octillery, actually, because Cotton Lift is a big deal. And I just said how I like Training Court as well as my E-Searches, because I think it's really important to maintain these basic energies, specifically when you are going the Moltres route. And I think Cotton Lift can be really nice, makes that Ordinary Rod an even better card as well. And Gossifleur is actually a really good basic. It's like playing more Sobbles in your deck, because it also has a colorless Call for Family attack that can get 3 basics down. So I think it's not bad as playing like a 1-1 or a 2-1 package even of the Eldegoss, something I do want to experiment with more. And of course, now that we know this deck is what it's trying to do and how it is trying to accumulate a massive hand, people may aggressively Marnie you that little bit more, which might mean that this deck needs to play a couple more actual power supporters, like a Research, like a Marnie of its own coming in, possibly even for mirror match situations, which I think is going to be a massive headache on all fronts. And there's also the option for Brawly, not actually a bad card in this deck because you play so many Rapid Strikers. When you are leaning into the Urshifu side of the deck and the Yoga Loop side of the deck, the Octillery is an important card to get online as well, so Brawly can be a helpful supporter there, and is not even like a bad play turn 2 when you are somewhat of a setup deck here. On to number 4, we have Malamar, obviously one of my favourites. It's an archetype that is probably the strongest one-prize deck right now, because you have big uptrade potential with the Rapid Strike Tentacles. It is a combo deck. You are looking to do lots of Shady Dealing, lots of use of your Octillery throughout the game, and Cynthia's Ambition allows you to grow that hand size. It has got a couple regional top 8s. The community are also pretty high on this archetype. Its matchup spread, again, is one of these sort of deceiving things where I don't feel too uncomfortable into the likes of the Duraludon matchup, even though it's a 30%er. Inteleon, like low 40s, not too bad. Again, this is really down to the pilots of the deck, because it is such a specific combination that you have to do, and although you are sort of solitairing your own hand at times, your own internal decisions will greatly affect not just how much damage you're doing on the turn itself, but also how much potential you have for the following turn. So it is a delicate deck to play perfectly, so I really do think it's one that you have to get your reps in with if you want to jam some Malamar. But I do think, again, this has big uptrade potential. Is a little bit scarier than it was when I played it in Liverpool, because I do think Jolteon is still on that uptick, and I also think Rapid Strike Urshifu is on that uptick, and those are decks that you certainly want to dodge as Rapid Mally. But here's my list. It's actually just one card different from the list I played in Liverpool. I've cut the Tower of Waters to add in a third Remoraid. It's simple enough that this is just a better early game card that still has that Rapid Strike tag. So I'm keeping those really high ratios that I'm a huge fan of, to make sure that you are not whiffing KOs on the likes of Mew and the likes of Arceus. I'm still not playing Boss. It's one of those cards I've gone to and from with, because it's a much more awkward bomb than Escape Rope, but at least it can give you some bench control over your opponent's side of the field can be really important against things like Arc Intel specifically, to deny their like multiple Drizzles to pick up and put down quick shooting and Shady Dealing and Aqua Bulleting you, that sort of thing. So I do easily see Boss coming into the deck, but right now I'm just on my same 60 and cutting that Stadium for a slightly better early game card, especially because one thing I really noticed going from day 1 to day 2, when everyone actually knows that you're playing Malamar, they make you go first, and that's really bad. So in game 3 situations, when your opponent makes you go first, you just want that extra basic because, it's some extra early game protection, which I think is a really big deal. So I like the third Remoraid right now. Other options, like I said, if you still like Tower, I don't think it's a bad card at all. It gives you some leeway, some protection here and there, and, obviously against things like Collapse Stadium. So the Tower could be good in that instance to unlock your board. Boss's Orders as well, like I said, I can certainly understand it. It gives you some control over what your opponent's doing, whereas right now you're just hoping to put your head down and race as fast as possible and hope that hope you can win the race in that instance. But Boss does give you some help here and there. And of course, there's still the debate of whether or not you actually want to tech for the spread decks. I still don't think they're going to be popular enough to be warranting the 2 bombs that you have to put into your deck, because Manaphy isn't just a 1-card include. You basically always have to put in a quick ball at the same time as well. Which is also an awkward card because it's a bomb in its own right that you can draw, and it's something that you have to tutor out to discard your Manaphy in every matchup that isn't spread, and I still feel like that will take up the majority of your day 1 and 2 over just hitting these spread decks over and over again. So that's why I'm still not playing Manaphy. It's one of those feels bad moments where someone flips over a Jolteon and you know that you're in for a bad time, but you just sort of take it on the chin, I think. In number 3, then, we have the Arceus Bird Box. This is going to be the type coverage build with Zapdos and Moltres, the V as well as the regular Moltres. Really just saying that Fighting Weakness and Dark Weakness are going to be important things to cover in the game, and trying to pivot from a 2-prize deck into a 1-prize deck into those later stages when Fiery Wrath is really dangerous. So obviously a pretty good deck. It's had 5 top 8 placements, so certainly a strong one. And I think there's a lot to say about the sort of Dark Moltres package. We've seen how good it is with Urshifu now. We've seen it with Arceus. I think in general, it's just a really good win condition against many decks. And there's not too much to say about this list. Again, very close to the Ian and Nick list that we saw in the US. And we're sticking true, more or less, to that 60. With not too many changes included. But there are some tech options for sure. Palpad can give you some good redundancy of prizing supporters here and there. Escape Rope is always just a nice option to have in the deck. I feel like you are limited on your switch outs, especially because how much you love using Shady Dealings Inteleon rather than Drizzile. Being forced into one of your 2 scoop up nets early is really annoying, so the Rope could be an interesting option. And Medicham V is actually something that I'm considering in this deck because, of course, Zapdos is far less effective, or should be far less effective, when more Arceus players are choosing to play Dunsparce. But of course, you do play Quick Shooting, and you play Scoop Up Net, and you play Double Turbo. So what's stopping you from Yoga Looping and then going into Zapdos afterwards and just one-shotting their Arceus? I feel like it could still be a game plan for you. The Zapdos sort of just comes in later than turn 2, basically, which is awkward in its own right. But I still think that the caped Zapdos is still a really big deal and a problem for them to deal with. So I want to try some Yoga Loop shenanigans. I think it would also improve some of the 1-prize matchups out there as well. So just try and punish Dunsparce basically by having Yoga Loop in this 60, just how we've seen the Rapid Strike Urshifu deck come across and overcome Dunsparces and overcome Manaphy's, that sort of thing. Medicham could do the same thing in the Arceus build. In at number 2, we have Arceus Inteleon. This is, like I said, way out in front, I think, alongside Mew as easily the 2 strongest archetypes right now. It's had 4 regional top 8s, including a win, and it's really because it's just an options box, really. You can be disruptive with Judge and Path. You have damage removal with Cheren's Care, and you're normally forcing that 7-prize game, and it's not only an awkward 7 prizes, but it's also a lot to take 2 prizes in the first place because you're throwing big charms on your Arceus, and there's just a lot of meat to get through here. You have the consistency of Starbirth and Shady Dealings to fall back on, so you're usually not whiffing stuff. You're getting into the game early, and yeah, you're just trying to say that Arceus is OP, and that's proving to be the case right now. As the list again, fairly simplistic. I'm playing the Collapse right now as my counter stadium. I just think it's a decent card in the meta. With so much expectation of other people playing Inteleon. This can also act in Mirror as like an extra healing card as well, where you can remove the damaged Arceus even without the use of Cheren's Care, so I think that's also pretty reasonable. We're of course playing Dunsparce to help us out against Urshifu and help us out against Zapdos, but it's not the be-all and end-all like I just mentioned earlier, so something to bear in mind there, but in general, just a fairly consistent 60 that we're seeing here. For a few other tech options, if you want to put that Manaphy in to again help out against the spread decks, that can be nice. A sort of softer choice is playing Tool Jammer over one of your big charms. That obviously helps out against Jolteon that little bit more, so they can't do the Cheren thing into you quite as easily because you're denying their elemental badge, so it's not so easy for them to heal their Jolteons. That can be a really big deal for you. And if they miss like early energy drop, the Jammer again is going to stop them attacking altogether, which I think is great. Capture Energy easily could be subbed in for one or possibly even two of your energy cards, like cutting down to one, or sorry, dropping one double turbo and one water could easily make way for a couple captures because getting early Arceus is so important in the deck. And there's also the option for even more disruptive supporters, the likes of Avery, the likes of Sydney coming into the 60. Avery obviously disrupting the Suicunes and the Mallies out there, whereas Sydney is disrupting Mew much more specifically, and can also be nice in mirror match situations when you're trying to still develop that path, and you can also hit some key cards like double turbo from the opponent at the same time. So extra disruption certainly an option in the 60 if need be. I'm also going to show off a sort of dark package of the same deck because this is like in between the Ian Robb Nick list and the straight Inteleon by having a little bit of dark package in here, adds the Clara, adds the Galarian Moltres, and plays the Crobat package, Crobat being a really good card against Malamar because you keep throwing one prizes at them by doing the 70 damage hit and run attack with the Crobat. Obviously you're hitting for weakness against Malamar, so you're taking those KOs, constantly throwing one prizes at them, and that can be a huge headache for them, especially because Malamar players always go second, so you can initiate the race with Crobat, and you have enough one prizes in your deck that you just keep throwing them at the opponents the entire game and make life as awkward as possible. You basically pretend to be a one prize deck in the matchup, which I think is a big problem for them. And against other archetypes, Crobat is something that you can build towards, obviously, against Mew. If you establish that path and Crobat isn't immediately Gus KO'd, you can evolve up, get the value, and you are still that big VMAX Dark-type Pokemon. You try and Big Charm up and make the most out of him. Still use him sparingly, but he is certainly usable. I still think it's completely fine to go the pure Arceus route and just have the Moltres as a late-game swing option, basically, in that matchup, especially with Clara inbuilt and your Shady Dealings online. So yeah, I think this is also a solid route. I can certainly expect some people going down this 60. I have made the space for Manaphy in this list as well, because I think it's that little bit more important for this list to protect your guys, because of how important it is to have those Dealings online for Malevolent Charge late game. To make it actually come together. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on a dark package versus a straight water build. And then finally, to no one's surprise, we have Mew as the top pick in the game right now. It's had a lot of top 8 placements, including one win. It's just still one of the most consistent and aggressive decks in the format. Psychic Leap is something to master in the deck as well. Can certainly help out in some of your more awkward matchups that are trying to use the Moltres against you, so certainly something you need to bear in mind. But in general, yeah, very fast, very aggressive deck that has options to one-hit KO with Melodious Echo at times, with many Fusion Energy in play, or just going over the top with a ton of tablets all in one go. It's a very difficult deck to pilot correctly, especially with so many matchups naturally sort of considering Mew in mind in most instances, but boy, this deck still has the power and potential to get through all of them. My deck has actually gone almost in a time capsule back to the start of the format. I've really gone retro with the 60, where I've gone for the double tower, the one cemetery, the one training court. I really like one psychic, one court for a bit of extra protection now that Whimsicott's become a bit of a known quantity. I want to have that little extra safety net where I can sparkle and turn attach a psychic energy at least, and carry on with my day and knock out Whimsicott's hopefully. All in one go and force more out of the opponent. I also think Cemetery is not really a bad card at all. We've seen it in some online decks recently where it's double Symmetry, double Rose Tower, because that Symmetry, sticking late game against these Arceus players that only play like 2 stadiums, for example, is really annoying for them, and is like using tablets against them, which is excellent in the matchup. So yeah, I like the 4 count of stadiums. I think it's responsible. I like the high cram count. I like Echoing Horn still in the list. Like I said, I still respect Duraludon as an archetype in the game. So cutting that is something that makes me a little bit nervous. So yeah, a pretty straightforward, simple Mew list. Back to the origins, basically, of the deck. But there are still plenty of other options going on here. Pump Caboose certainly is one that's on my radar. I think I could easily see myself dropping like 1 cram, 1 stadium to put in 1 Fog Crystal, 1 Pump Caboo, just to give myself additional outs to just not lose to Judge Path. Tower of Darkness, if you prefer the quad tower build over the double Rose Tower and whatever else you want to play, is always fine. Switching Cups, giving you some extra protection around Marnie at the very least, as well as being able to put things like Fusion Energy back on top of your deck so you can sparkle them back out, can give you some safety net of just drawing the wrong things in the wrong order as the deck, which is sometimes a bit of a hindrance with Mew here and there. And I've also heard murmurs of Tool Jammer coming in over one of your choice belts. I'm personally not a huge fan of it, because Tool Jammer, yes, is like a choice belt in exactly the situation where you're against a big charmed Pokemon, but in a lot of other instances it's clearly just far worse. But the upside of Tool Jammer is it helps out somewhat in mirror match situations when the opponent is forced to take a 3-prize KO and they're forced to use Double Turbo. If you have Oricorio, Tool Jammer, and Double Turbo down with the tool attached, they're gonna struggle. So yeah, that's the upside of Jammer. It's a specific case in mirrors, but it can be a game winner at times. And then Marnie is a card that we actually saw a judge in Sao Paulo, but I do think Marnie's better in every way as that choice, but can be disruptive against the opponents. And it's really important against these Clara Moltres builds. You can really ruin their sort of late game package altogether just by hitting them with a Marnie that they're maybe not expecting, and just churning through with your Mew. Not a bad choice at all. Outside of the top 10, then, there are some other decks creeping in. Of course, there's a huge plethora of Arceus decks, and I had to limit it to just the ones that we talked about today, but there are so many more out there. There's Mustard builds, there's obviously Gengar Arceus, which was a regional winning deck, but just hasn't really followed up with the popularity just yet. There's murmurs of Jolteon with a Memory Capsule coming in, being a disruption option against Intel builds, which I'm interested in for certain. But it does mean that you don't have to play, you have to not play Inteleon yourself, which makes me a little bit nervous, even though the barrel is pretty good. Malamar with Max Jammer, really annoying card to deal with. Urshi alongside Arceus and some basic energy, not a bad choice either. And I'm interested to see how Lucario V-Star shapes up in the meta. I personally don't think it's going to be all that strong. 240 is good numbers to be hitting with Fighting Knuckle, but you are still weak to Psychic in your own right, and I think it's slightly worse than Urshifu in most instances. So I want to see how that performs. And then there's also some non-Arceus decks that are on those fringes as well. Ice Rider, another disruptive path deck that can take advantage of Inteleon. Urshi and Umbreon have been sort of creeping back in for some online events recently. Obviously has that dark typing and fighting typing that it can boast. Can play a 1-prize game when it has to as well. So a pretty interesting combo there. And of course there's the Sander Control deck that did very well at Liverpool, and I want to see how that deck adapts to the format for EUIC as well. Now that it's a known quantity, and there could be some other things more on the radar than possibly previously. So yeah, those are the decks and the sort of outside the top 10 that I think are looking in, trying to break it in this tournament. There's a lot to get excited about for the EUIC. I think it's always nice going into a developed metagame where we've seen all 4 regions with vastly different results and a lot of different tech options being selected. So this is going to be really a nitty-gritty tournament where you really have to be selective over, your 58th, 59th, 60th cards. Make sure that those techs are working for you. Don't over-tech as well in the tournament. Bear in mind you're playing a lot of rounds of Pokemon. Consistency is always going to be massive. So I do also encourage that you don't go crazy wanting to win every single matchup, and still stay simplistic enough that your own deck is executing its strategy enough times as well. My personal pick would still be Rapid Malamar. I think it's still got a lot of potential, and as much as I am expecting some Urshifu and Jolteon to be around, I still think that you can easily have a pretty good record by dodging and weaving those matchups and just one-hit KOing basically everything else. And Jack is still on that Mew train, still the most consistent deck in the format. And once you nail your game plans with Mew, you will still out-consistency people, you will still outpace many archetypes and simply win races. So I still think it has a ton of legs as well. Thanks so much, guys. I'm flying out next week. I will see you at Frankfurt to get gaming once again with EUIC. I'm so excited to have it back. Let me know your thoughts down below. What decks are you excited to bring? What are you between if you haven't chosen just yet? And what tech cards do you think are going to take it all the way? I'll hear it all down below. I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.